So in the last video, we started Chapter 8, Indian Empires from 1500 BCE to 1100 CE, by talking about the Aryans who moved into northern India and then east to the Ganges and setting up states and then an empire. And we talked about the Maurya Empire and how it declined as there was no strong leader to take power, and as different invasions were taking place in different parts of India. Today we're going to focus on the Gupta Empire, which began in 320 CE and lasted to 550 CE. And the Gupta began their rise to power in the Ganges Valley, and the founder was not an important historical person or wasn't even really famous. He just married a princess of a powerful family. And so having a deep sense of history and the importance of the past and a desire to be a legitimate ruler, he deliberately named himself after the founder of the Mauryan Empire. And so he became Chandragupta I. So this dynasty, founded by Chandragupta, began in northeastern India and was spread throughout India by his successors. First of all, his son, Samudragupta, had already earned a reputation as one of India's best military conquerors. In fact, records of his battles were inscribed all over India. And so Samudra and his son and successor Chandragupta II continued to spread this empire further. And Chandragupta II conquered the Shakas, who invaded India at the end of the Mauryan Empire and annexed western India and took some Arabian seaports, and successfully married his daughter to the head of the Vakataka lineage, where he was able to concrete an alliance between his kingdom and one in central India. So Gupta rule was normally indirect, and when they conquered areas or they had distant military victories, the Gupta emperors would actually abdicate power and give up the task of administration and withdraw. And the only thing they really demanded from the people was tribute. And we've talked about the tributary system before. This is really just the Gupta forcing the people that they had conquered to pay a fee to them in order to keep the peace so that they would not attack the people. I guess it's sort of like a bribe to keep the Gupta from interfering in these areas. So the Guptas, who allowed a great deal of freedom to their people, even the ones that they had conquered, giving them considerable independence, also experienced a golden age of learning. The Golden Age brought about a resurgence of Sanskrit literature and Hindu philosophy. The Gupta Empire began to use Sanskrit for its official correspondence. So anything that was like a law or had to do with statecraft or politics was recorded in Sanskrit. So another thing that happened during the Golden Age of learning was the Arthasastra was brought back. And that was what we talked about in the last video, a political and economic theory that the Maurya dynasty had clung to, just the justice of the big fish, or that the larger states swallow the smaller ones. And there wasn't really anything that the smaller states could do about it, because that's just how things were. And the Maurya were okay with that. But the Arthasastra was brought back, it was revised, and it was codified into law throughout the Gupta Empire as well. There was also a resurgence of Hinduism during this time. So major Hindu philosophies emerged The caste system was elaborated and began to be enforced, and became more strict. And Hinduism, as it resurged, actually surpassed Buddhism, as Hindu Brahmin or Hindu priests took over the presentation of Buddhist rituals. So, around this time, into the 5th century CE, the power of the Gupta begins to decline. So, what caused this great empire to begin its decline? Following earlier invasions by the Shakas around 94 BCE and the Kushanas around 50 CE, as a part of the domino effect in Central Asia, the Huns began invading as well. And this is, sometimes they're called the Hunas, but this is the same group of people who invaded Rome in the mid 400 CE. So Huns or Huna, however you want to say that. The Huns had actually interfered in the Indian Empire starting around 460, and they began by just disrupting trade, which weakened the Guptas, interfered with their wealth. And then from 500 CE, the Gupta control dissolved into a world of regional strongmen and Huna invaders, into just this era of chaos. And so the Huna legacies include increased access to India from more outside groups and the destruction of urban culture of the Northwest. So just to kind of sum up the effect of the Huns on India, the legacy that they left was just the destruction and dismemberment of the Gupta Empire, the reduction of their interregional trade, the decline of Indian culture, and the introduction of new nomadic groups into already settled imperial lands, which was closely, pretty much identical to those of their Hun brothers in the Roman Empire. Again, the Hunas and the Huns deriving from the same group of people. So another effect of the invasions at the end of the Gupta Empire was regional diversity. And basically, the Ganges Valley had been the home to the Aryans who first came there, the Maurya, the Gupta, later the Mughals, and eventually the British. And so really this regional diversity was just the product of all of the migrations that were taking place. So, in just comparing Indian history with Chinese history, cultural continuity is really what held these people together, not political control. And that was true in China as well. Another important effect of the invasions was sea trade and cultural influence. Their Indian influence extended from Rome to Southeast Asia. And the influence of the Ganges Valley powers was tied to overland trade. And as we know, trade is effective in spreading all kinds of ideas and religion, sometimes diseases, definitely goods. So the coastal regions used sea trade to extend Indian culture far to the east and the west. Greater India refers to that area on the map that we discussed in the last video surrounding India. So when I was circling in what we were going to be talked about, we covered Nepal and Bhutan and Pakistan, and this would include Sri Lanka as well. And these are just the areas on the outskirts of India that were heavily influenced by Indian culture. We talked yesterday about Ashoka, the only Buddhist Mauryan emperor who sent out missionaries to Sri Lanka and Myanmar, which began extended Indian influence there in the 3rd century BCE. But there was also a port at the tip of Vietnam called Phu Nhan, which was the center of Indian influence in the southeast. And it wasn't just trade that was a part of spreading Indian culture, but it was also the military who had a role in diffusing Indian culture to other parts of Greater India and the rest of Asia. So in our last slide, we're going to look at a comparison of India, China, and Rome. And of course, we covered Rome in chapter 6 and China in chapter 7. So we should be at least a little bit familiar with the governments and the foreign relations and the invasions that took place in China and Rome. The first category here is administration, and this just speaks to the way in which the government was run. And in China and Rome both, there were large institutionalized bureaucracies and systems of administration. So they had law codes that were consistent throughout their empires that lasted for centuries in Rome and millennia in China. India, by contrast, had states and then empires that were just extensions of family lineages. And even the most powerful of India's empires, the Mauryan and the Gupta empires, those were family holdings. Even Chandragupta Maurya's dynasty began to fall after the death of his grandson, Ashoka. So in India, power seemed more personal than institutional, like it was in China and Rome. In terms of international relations, China and Rome tended to be not gentle with their conquered peoples, but they did allow them some leniency in maintaining their old law codes. And even in China, where they were forced to assimilate to Chinese culture, they didn't force them to change religions or adhere to proper Chinese protocol on everything. In India, they were stricter in international relations. And just to mention the Arthasastra again, that policy of the law of the fish, the large swallow the small. And a quote from the Arthasastra actually says, "When one king is weaker than the other, he should make peace with him. When he is stronger than the other, he should make war with him." So India, by comparison to China and Rome, were more harsh with the people that they conquered. So interestingly, one thing that all three of these great empires shared was the invasion by the Huns. This was one political experience that was a common thread for all three. And in fact, the last 3 chapters show the great importance of the Hunas or the Huns in world history, particularly from the 3rd century to the 6th. So this was one thing that all three of them shared. In local institutions and the state, China and Rome tended to take more of a hands-on approach, as they were both directly involved in their subjects' affairs. India really tended to work within the pre-existing local institutions like the caste system or the family or the guilds, called Jati, Jati. They really didn't have like a direct hold on the people. Their influence was more or less cultural than it was political. And so that was one difference, is that China and Rome tended to bring some political continuity to their empires, and India did not. And that concludes our video. Thanks for listening.